The rain was falling on the big windows of the Williams mansion when Grace Johnson got on her knees to clean the marble floor. Her hands were shaking as she held the old brush. She could hear expensive shoes coming down the stairs, and the sound made her stomach twist. Her boss was coming, and she knew he was in a bad mood. Grace couldn't understand why seeing 22-year-old Ethan Williams always made her feel so sad, like she was drowning. She told herself it was because she was afraid of him. But deep down, Grace knew something else was wrong. Something about Ethan Williams felt like a piece of her heart that had been missing for a very long time. Hello, gorgeous family. Welcome back to Luxurious Obsession Stories. Today's story is going to break your heart in ways you never imagined. This is about love, secrets, and the most shocking twist you've ever heard. Hit that subscribe button right now because you won't believe what happens next. Drop a so if you're ready to cry with us. The Williams mansion was huge. 6 floors of white stone and glass windows with gardens that looked like they came from a fairy tale. Grace had been working there for 3 months, and she still felt like she didn't belong. Every morning she walked through the back door where the workers entered. The kitchen was bigger than most people's whole house. The dining room had a table for 20 people. Everything was perfect and expensive and cold. But what bothered Grace most wasn't the fancy stuff. It was how quiet everything was. Rich people lived in a different kind of silence. They never had to shout to be heard. They never had to fight for anything. And that silence made Grace feel like even her breathing was too loud. "Grace," Mrs. Margaret's voice cut through the morning noise. Mrs. Margaret ran the house and had been doing it for 18 years. "Young master wants his breakfast on the blue plates today, the ones with the silver edges." Grace stood up and smoothed down her white apron. "Yes, ma'am. The usual food? Fresh fruit, perfect orange juice, coffee from the expensive beans, and Grace?" Mrs. Margaret's voice got quiet. "Don't talk to him unless he talks to you first. He has important phone calls today." Grace nodded, but something inside her hated that rule. In 3 months, she had brought Ethan Williams breakfast 47 times. He had actually talked to her only 12 times. Each time was short and usually about something wrong with her work. But there was something about the way he looked at her. Not like most rich people looked at their maids, like they weren't there. He looked at her like he was trying to figure something out. It made her nervous and confused. "I understand, ma'am." "Good. And Grace, the young master has been stressed lately. His business partners are giving him trouble about some deal, and when he's worried—" Mrs. Margaret didn't finish, but Grace knew what that meant. When Ethan Williams was stressed, everyone in the house had a bad day. Grace went to the kitchen, where everyone was working fast to get breakfast ready. The kitchen had 6 people whose only job was making sure every meal was perfect for a man who had never been hungry. "Morning, Grace," said Sarah, one of the younger maids. She was polishing silverware until it shined like mirrors. "Sleep okay?" Grace smiled, but the truth was she didn't sleep well anymore. Her room was comfortable, but comfort couldn't stop the thoughts that kept her awake. Thoughts about things that happened 22 years ago. Thoughts about a baby boy she had held for just 24 hours. "Good enough," Grace said. She started picking out fruit for Ethan's breakfast. She knew exactly what he liked because she had watched him carefully for 3 months. "You know," Sarah said, lowering her voice, "I've worked in houses like this for 5 years, and I've never seen anyone as picky as young Master Ethan." "Picky how?" Grace asked, though she already knew. "Everything has to be perfect. Yesterday he sent back orange juice because he said it didn't taste fresh enough." Sarah shook her head. "Can you imagine? Being able to taste if juice is 30 minutes old or an hour old?" Grace could imagine it. When you never had to worry about having food at all, maybe you noticed tiny things like that. "He's lived a different life than us," Grace said carefully. "That's for sure," Sarah laughed. "Did you know his watch costs more than I'll make in 3 years?" Grace had noticed the watch. She had also noticed how he checked it all the time, like time worked for him instead of the other way around. "Money changes people," Grace said, putting orange pieces on the expensive plate. "Do you think it makes them happy?" Sarah asked. "All that money and stuff?" Grace stopped working and thought about it. She had been watching Ethan Williams for 3 months. She had seen him happy when business went well. She had seen him angry when things went wrong. But she had never seen him look peaceful. There was something restless about Ethan Williams. He moved through his beautiful house like he was looking for something he couldn't find. I think happiness and money are two different things, Grace said slowly. Before Sarah could answer, they heard footsteps on the stairs. Ethan was coming. Grace felt her stomach tighten. He's coming, Sarah whispered. Grace picked up the breakfast tray and checked everything one more time. The blue plates with silver edges caught the morning light. The orange juice was perfect. The coffee was exactly how he liked it. Everything was perfect except the way her hands shook a little as she got ready to see him again. The dining room was like something from a rich people's movie. The wooden table could seat 20 people, but usually only Ethan ate there in the mornings. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling, and expensive paintings watched from the walls. Grace walked in quietly. She had learned that rich people liked their comfort to look easy, like no one had to work for it. Ethan sat at the head of the table, looking at a tablet with numbers that kept changing. He wore a gray suit that fit him perfectly, and his black hair looked like it took a lot of time and money to style. Grace came from his left side, like Mrs. Margaret had taught her, and started setting out breakfast. Put the plate in the right spot, put the silverware exactly 1 inch from the table edge, put the coffee cup so the handle pointed toward his right hand. The orange juice tastes different today, Ethan said without looking up. Grace paused. Different house or more sour? He finally looked up and his dark eyes met hers. Did you use different oranges? No, sir. Same oranges that come every Tuesday. I squeezed the juice this morning at 7:15. Maybe it's the weather, Ethan said, taking another sip. Weather can change how fruit tastes. Grace nodded, though she wondered if anyone could really taste such small differences. Should I make fresh juice, sir? No, I don't have time. Ethan went back to his tablet. But tell whoever orders the fruit, if the quality changed, we should find other suppliers. Of course, sir. Grace kept working, very aware that Ethan was so close. She could smell his expensive cologne. She could see how his fingers moved on the tablet screen. There was a small scar on his right hand that looked like it came from when he was a child. Tell me, Ethan said suddenly, how long have you been working as a maid? The question surprised Grace. In 3 months, Ethan had never asked about her life. Most of my adult life, sir. And before that? Grace hesitated. The truth was complicated and painful, but rich people didn't want complicated answers from their maids. I left school early, sir. Family problems. Family problems, Ethan repeated. That's a nice way of saying being poor made you work instead of going to school. Grace's hands stopped moving. There was something in his voice that made her feel like he was studying her. Yes, sir, that's right. Did you ever think about going back to school later? The question hurt. Grace had thought about school many times, but explaining that would mean admitting to dreams that never happened. School is for people who don't need to work every day just to eat, sir. Ethan looked up at her then, really looked at her. That's a pretty dark way to see things. It's realistic. Is it? Or is it just an excuse for not trying? The words hit Grace hard. She put down the fruit knife carefully, trying to stay calm while anger built up inside her. With respect, sir, she said, keeping her voice steady, it's easy to think anything is possible when you've never had real problems. Everyone has problems. Some problems are harder than others. Ethan put down his tablet and looked at her with the same attention he gave his business deals. Explain that. Grace knew she was walking into dangerous territory. Maids who argued with their bosses usually got fired, but something about his tone made her keep talking. Your problems, sir, are choosing between Harvard and Oxford or which house to visit on vacation. My problems are choosing between buying medicine and paying rent, or deciding which meal to skip so the lights don't get cut off. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan stared at her, and Grace realized she had just broken every rule about how workers should talk to their bosses. I'm sorry, sir, she said quickly. That was wrong. Was it? Ethan's voice was quiet. Or was it honest? Being honest can be wrong sometimes. And this is one of those times? Grace met his eyes. There was something that looked like curiosity there, like he was seeing something new. Yes, sir, it is. Ethan nodded slowly, then picked up his tablet again. Finish breakfast. And Grace? Yes, sir. Next time you want to say something honest, say it. I like honesty better than lies. Grace finished her work in silence, her mind full of questions. Why had Ethan Williams told her to be honest? Why had he looked at her like she mattered? And why did every talk with him leave her feeling seen and confused at the same time? As she got ready to leave, Ethan spoke again. "The scar on your hand," he said. "How did you get it?" Grace looked down at the thin white line on her left palm. "Broken glass, sir, when I was 7. Ethan said quietly, like the information meant something to him. Grace left the dining room with more questions than answers, and the strange feeling that Ethan Williams had been studying her just as much as she had been watching him. That afternoon, Grace was told to clean Ethan's private study while he was out for meetings. The study was his special place, full of expensive books and important papers where he made business decisions. As Grace dusted his desk, she noticed something that made her heart stop. There were papers everywhere, with notes in Ethan's handwriting, words that jumped out at her. Adoption records, birth mother, private investigator, and worst of all, Lagos Adoptions 2000-2003. Her hands started shaking. Ethan was looking for his birth parents. He was getting close to finding the truth. On the corner of his desk was a folder marked Personal Investigation. Grace knew she shouldn't look, but something made her lift the edge just enough to see inside. There were photocopies of birth certificates, adoption papers, lists of babies placed with families, and there, highlighted in yellow, an entry that made her knees weak. March 15th, 2002. Male baby, 3.2 kilograms, mother Grace Johnson, father unknown, placed with Williams family. Her name, right there in black and white, part of Ethan's search for his real parents. Finding something interesting? Grace spun around, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Ethan stood in the doorway, his face unreadable. I was cleaning, and I saw. Grace felt her face get hot with embarrassment. That I'm looking for my birth parents? Ethan came into the room and closed the door. It's not a secret, Grace. I've been searching for years. Of course, sir, I didn't mean to look. Didn't you? Ethan came closer. You seem very nervous for someone who just accidentally saw some papers. Grace forced herself to let go of the desk, though her hands kept shaking. Adoption it's emotional, sir. Is it? Ethan stopped right in front of her. Tell me, Grace, why do you think a birth mother gives up her child? The question felt like a trap. I think most mothers do it because they love their children too much to keep them when they can't take proper care of them. But do they regret it? Do they wonder what happened to those children? Grace closed her eyes, remembering holding a baby in her arms, remembering his smell, the way he looked at her before she signed the papers that took him away forever. I think they regret it every day, she whispered. But I also think they never stopped believing it was right. When she opened her eyes, Ethan was staring at her intensely. You talk like you know about this personally. Life experiences shape how we see things, sir. They do. Ethan sat down in his chair. Grace, can I ask you something personal? Grace's heart started racing. Of course, sir. Do you have children? The simple question broke something inside Grace. She opened her mouth to lie, to give the safe answer. Instead, she heard herself say, I had a son once. Had? I gave him up for adoption when he was 2 days old. The silence was so complete that Grace could hear her own heartbeat. Ethan's face had gone white, and his hands gripped his chair. When? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. 22 years ago, Grace said, tears starting to fall. March 15th, 2002. Ethan jumped up so fast his chair fell over. That's impossible. I know it seems you don't understand, Ethan's voice was shaking. That's my birthday, March 15th, 2002. That's when I was born. Grace's legs gave out and she fell into the nearest chair. I know, she whispered. You know, Ethan's voice cracked. How could you know that? Grace looked up at this young man, tall and handsome with her father's chin and her mother's eyes. Because I've been looking at my son every morning for 3 months, bringing him breakfast and cleaning his room, and trying to find the courage to tell him the truth. The folder fell from Ethan's hands, papers scattering everywhere. In the silence, Grace could hear cars outside, could hear life continuing while her world fell apart. You're saying you're my mother, Ethan whispered. Yes, Grace breathed. I'm your mother, and I've loved you every day for 22 years. But before Ethan could say anything, before he could understand what this meant, Grace stood up. I know this is a shock, she said quickly. I know you need time to think. So I'm going to leave now, and when you're ready, if you're ever ready, you know where to find me. She walked to the door, her heart breaking with every step. Grace, Ethan called out, his voice small and confused. She turned back one last time. I want you to know, she said softly, that giving you away was the hardest thing I ever did. But seeing the man you became, I know it was right. You got everything I wanted for you. And with that, Grace left her son alone with the truth that would change everything. Grace sat in her small room in the servants' quarters, her suitcase packed on the bed. Tomorrow she would disappear from Ethan's life again, just like she had 22 years ago. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't stop thinking about the look on her son's face when she told him the truth. Outside her door, the mansion was quiet. But Grace knew Ethan was awake too, probably sitting in his study, trying to understand how his whole world had changed in a single afternoon. She had given him space to think, but now she wondered if she should have stayed and explained everything. How could she leave without telling him the whole story? How could she disappear again without helping him understand why she had made the choices she made? At 2 a.m., Grace heard a soft knock on her door. Her heart jumped. She knew it was Ethan. Grace? His voice was quiet, uncertain. Are you awake? Grace opened the door to find her son standing in the hallway, still wearing the same clothes from earlier, his hair messy, like he'd been running his hands through it. I couldn't sleep, he said. I keep thinking about what you told me, and I have so many questions. Of course, Grace said, stepping aside to let him in. Ask me anything. Ethan looked around her small room, at the narrow bed, the tiny dresser, the packed suitcase. His face fell when he saw the luggage. You're leaving, he said, and Grace heard pain in his voice. I thought it would be easier for you if I... No, Ethan interrupted. Please don't leave, not yet. I need to understand what happened. I need to know the whole story. Grace nodded and sat on the edge of her bed. Ethan sat in the only chair, leaning forward with his hands clasped together. Start from the beginning, he said quietly. Tell me about my father. Tell me about you. Tell me how we ended up here. Grace took a deep breath. It's not a pretty story, Ethan. I don't need it to be pretty. I need it to be true. Grace looked at her son, this successful, powerful man who was asking about the worst period of her life, and decided he deserved to know everything. I was 17 when I met your father, she began. His name was David, and I thought he was the most wonderful man in the world. I was working 3 jobs just to afford a corner of a room I shared with 2 other girls, Grace continued. I cleaned offices at night, sold bread in the mornings, and worked at a small restaurant in the afternoons. I was saving money, dreaming of going back to school maybe. 3 jobs at 17, Ethan asked, his voice soft with something that might have been sympathy. We did what we had to do to survive, Grace said simply. Anyway, David started coming to the restaurant where I worked. He was older, maybe 25, and he drove a car that looked expensive to my young eyes. He was charming and handsome, and always left big tips. What did he do for work? He said he was starting his own business, that he was going to be rich someday. He seemed so confident, so sure of himself, and he treated me like I was special. Grace's voice got quieter. No one had ever called me beautiful before, Ethan. I was skinny from not eating enough, wearing clothes that had been washed until they were fading. But when David looked at me, I felt like a princess. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. He took advantage of you. I was young and naive, Grace admitted. He brought me little gifts, a flower, a chocolate bar, a pretty headband. He told me I was too good for that place, that he wanted to take care of me. And you fell in love with him. Completely, desperately, the way only a 17-year-old can fall in love. For 4 months I lived in a dream. David would pick me up after work, take me to restaurants I'd only seen from the outside. He bought me a dress that made me feel like a movie star. Grace paused, remembering those happy months before everything fell apart. He asked me to marry him, she continued. Said when his business was established, when he had enough money, we'd have the most beautiful life together. What happened? Ethan asked, though his voice suggested he already knew this story didn't have a happy ending. I got pregnant, Grace said simply. With you. I was so excited to tell him, Grace said, tears starting to form in her eyes. I planned it for a week. I bought his favorite food with money I couldn't afford to spend, cooked it in my tiny shared kitchen. I put on the dress he had bought me and waited for him to pick me up. How did you tell him? Ethan asked quietly. I took his hands in mine and said, David, I have something wonderful to tell you. We're going to have a baby. Grace closed her eyes, remembering that moment. The silence that followed was the longest moment of my life. His face went white, then red, then white again. He pulled his hands away like I had burned him. What did he say? He said, no, 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 this can't happen, not now. When I tried to tell him we could make it work, that we loved each other, he looked at me with panic in his eyes. Ethan's jaw was tight with anger. He abandoned you. He told me I had to get rid of it, Grace said, her voice breaking. He said it was a mistake, a problem that needed to be fixed. When I said I couldn't do that, couldn't kill our baby, he said I was on my own. He said what? Ethan's voice was dangerous now. He said if I chose to have the baby, I was choosing to do it alone, that he wasn't ready to be a father and might never be ready. Grace wiped her eyes. The drive back to my room was silent, except for my crying. When he dropped me off, he didn't even look at me. He just said, call me when you've made your decision, the right decision. Did you call him? No, and he never came back. Ethan stood up abruptly and started pacing the small room, his hands clenched into fists. He left you, pregnant and alone at 17. Yes, that coward, that selfish, pathetic excuse for a man. Grace watched her son pace, seeing his anger on her behalf, feeling strangely comforted by his reaction. What did you do? Ethan asked, sitting back down. For 3 days, I didn't eat. I couldn't keep food down anyway. I went through the motions of my jobs, but my mind was trying to figure out what to do. You had no one to help you? My parents died when I was 15. No family, no real friends. I had David's phone number, but Grace shrugged helplessly. I remembered the look in his eyes. He was gone. So you decided to have me. I decided I loved you too much to do what he asked. You weren't a mistake or a problem. You were my child. But as the months went on, Grace continued, I started to understand the reality of my situation. I had exactly 4,000 naira to my name. My rent was 2,000 naira a month for my corner of a room. Food was maybe 1,500 naira a week if I was careful. You were barely surviving, Ethan said quietly. I tried to figure out how to make it work, but I was going to have to stop working soon. You can't clean offices or stand selling bread all day when you're 8 months pregnant. And after you were born, how would I work at all? Who would watch you? Grace's voice got smaller. I saw other single mothers in my neighborhood. Their children were always hungry, always dirty, always crying. They grew up on the streets while their mothers worked, learning to survive instead of learning to read. You didn't want that for me. I wanted you to have everything I couldn't give you. That's when I started thinking about another option. Adoption, Ethan said. I started noticing rich families in the market with their children. Clean, healthy, happy children wearing nice clothes and eating ice cream. Children who went to school, who had toys and books and futures full of possibilities. Grace looked directly at Ethan. I began to wonder, what if you could have that life instead of the one I could provide? When did you make the decision? When I was 7 months pregnant, I finally worked up the courage to visit an adoption agency. I walked around the building 3 times before I was brave enough to go inside. What did they tell you? The social worker was a kind woman named Mrs. Henderson. She said adoption was one of the most loving things a mother could do, putting her child's needs before her own wants. Grace's voice broke. She showed me files of families waiting to adopt, doctors and lawyers and business owners, people with big houses and good jobs who had been trying to have children for years. And you found my parents? Mr. C.E. and Mrs. Victoria Williams. He was a successful businessman, she was a teacher. They had been trying to have children for 8 years. Their letter to potential birth mothers made me cry. What did they say? They wrote, "We have so much love to give. We promise to cherish your child, to give them the best education, to love them unconditionally, and to always be grateful to you for the incredible gift you've given us." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. They kept that promise. I'm so glad, Grace said, fresh tears falling. That's all I ever wanted. Tell me about when I was born, Ethan said softly. Grace smiled through her tears. You decided to come early. I went into labor on March 14th at 2:30 in the morning. I was alone and scared and in more pain than I could imagine. You were by yourself? I took a taxi to the government hospital. 18 hours later at 4:47 in the morning on March 15th, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Your first cry. What was I like? Perfect, Grace said immediately. Tiny and red and wrinkled, with dark hair and the most serious eyes. You had a small scar on your right hand from where the cord wrapped around your wrist during delivery. Ethan looked down at his hand, at the faint mark he'd always wondered about. I held you and forgot how to breathe, Grace continued. You were so perfect, so beautiful. I counted your fingers and toes over and over. I memorized every detail of your face. How long did we have together? 2 days. For 2 days, my world was nothing but you. I held you, fed you, sang to you. I talked to you about all the wonderful things you were going to experience. Ethan's voice was very quiet. What did you sing to me? Grace's face softened. Lullabies my mother used to sing to me. I told you stories about the life I hoped you would have, about school and friends and adventures. I promised you that even though I was letting you go, I would love you forever. When did my parents come? On the second day. Mr. C and Mrs. Victoria were exactly like their photos. Kind, gentle, so excited they could barely contain themselves. Mrs. Victoria cried when she saw you. What did they say? She whispered, "He's beautiful. He's absolutely perfect." Mr. C promised me they would love you and give you everything. They told me they were going to name you Ethan because it means strong and firm. Did you like the name? I loved it. It was perfect for my strong little boy. Grace wiped her eyes. They left that evening to prepare for taking you home. I spent my last night with you, holding you close, talking to you. What did you tell me? I told you about your new life, about the beautiful house you were going to live in, the parents who would love you, the education you would get. I told you that your first mother loved you, and that's why I was giving you away. Ethan was crying now too. What was it like, giving me away? The hardest thing I've ever done, Grace said simply. Mrs. Henderson came with your new parents the next morning. I dressed you in a tiny blue sleeper I had bought. It cost me a week's worth of food money. I wrapped you in the soft blanket Mrs. Victoria had brought. Do you remember what you said when you gave me to them? Grace nodded. I looked at you one last time. You were awake, looking up at me with those serious dark eyes. I told you that your first mother loved you and would always love you. Then I kissed your forehead and placed you in Mrs. Victoria's arms. What did you say to them? I said, take care of him. Mrs. Victoria promised they would love you like their own. I told her, he is your own now, be happy. Grace's voice broke completely. And then you were gone. I watched from the hospital window as they put you in their car and drove away, taking my heart with them. What did you do after? Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion. I stayed in the hospital an extra day because I couldn't face going back to my room without you. That evening, I made myself 2 promises. What promises? First, I would never try to contact you or interfere in your life. You had a family, and I wouldn't confuse you or cause problems. Ethan nodded, understanding. Second, I would make something of myself. I would work hard, save money, maybe even go back to school. I would become someone you could be proud of, even if you never knew I existed. Did you keep those promises? Both of them, for 22 years, Grace said. I worked harder than I ever had before. I saved every naira, took evening classes, slowly built a better life. But nothing filled the emptiness where you should have been. Did you ever want other children? I dated a few men over the years, but none of them could understand why I sometimes got sad for no reason. How could I explain that I had already loved and lost the most important person in my world? Ethan reached over and took her hand. What about my birthdays? Grace smiled sadly. Every March 15th, I bought a small cake and celebrated alone. I would light a candle and make a wish that you were happy and loved. I imagined what you might look like at 1, then 5, then 10, then 15. You celebrated my birthday every year, every single year. I would walk through rich neighborhoods sometimes, looking at the big houses and beautiful children, wondering if any of them might be you. Why didn't you try to find me? Because I had promised not to interfere, but also because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Afraid you wouldn't want to know me? Afraid you'd be angry that I gave you away? Afraid you'd see me as just a poor woman who cleaned houses and be ashamed. Ethan squeezed her hand. How did you end up working here? 3 months ago, I was looking for a new job. I saw an advertisement for a housemaid position with the Williams family. When I saw that name, Grace paused. I told myself it was probably a coincidence, but something made me apply anyway. What happened when you realized it was me? When Mrs. Margaret told me I'd be working for young Master Ethan Williams, born in 2002, my heart stopped. But I still didn't believe it until I saw you. What gave it away? Your eyes, those same serious dark eyes that looked at me in the hospital. The moment I saw you walking down those stairs, I knew. Why didn't you tell me then? Grace looked down at their joined hands. How do you tell someone that the maid serving their breakfast is the woman who gave birth to them? And besides, seeing you succeed, seeing the man you'd become, it proved I'd made the right choice. Even when I was cruel to you, you didn't know who I was. And honestly, seeing you confident and powerful, even if it meant you were cold to me, it was better than wondering if you were okay. But it hurt, Ethan said. Didn't it, when I treated you badly? Grace was quiet for a moment. Every harsh word felt like a knife. Every time you dismissed me or criticized my work, I wondered if giving you away had made you into someone who looked down on people like me. I'm so sorry, Ethan said, his voice breaking. I'm so sorry for every cruel word, every dismissive look, every moment I made you feel like you didn't matter. You couldn't have known. That doesn't make it okay. You sacrificed everything for me, and I repaid you with coldness. Ethan, look at me, Grace said firmly. You became exactly what I hoped you would become. Successful, educated, powerful. Yes, you were sometimes harsh, but you were also professional and hardworking. You built something with your life, but I forgot kindness. I forgot that everyone has a story. You can learn kindness. Your parents raised you to be good. I could see that in you even when you were being difficult. Ethan was quiet for a long time, processing everything she had told him. Grace, he said finally, I have something to tell you too. What? I've been searching for you for years. Since I turned 18, I've hired investigators, spent thousands of naira, followed every lead. I've wanted to find you my whole adult life. Grace stared at him in shock. You were looking for me? I wanted to understand where I came from. I wanted to know if you ever thought about me. I wanted to tell you that I turned out okay, that your sacrifice wasn't wasted. All this time you wanted to find me? Every day, and you were right here taking care of me without me knowing it. They sat in silence, both crying, both overwhelmed by the impossible journey that had brought them back together. What happens now? Grace asked quietly. Now we figure out how to be mother and son, Ethan said firmly. I don't know how to do this, but I want to try, if you'll have me. If I'll have you? Grace laughed through her tears. Ethan, I've wanted nothing more for 22 years. Then stay, please don't leave again. But I can't be your maid anymore. It wouldn't be right. You're not my maid, Ethan said, standing and pulling her into a hug. You're my mother, and I love you. Grace felt her son's arms around her for the first time since he was 2 days old, and her heart finally felt complete. I love you too, she whispered. I have loved you every single day. 6 months later, Grace Williams stood in the kitchen of the Victoria Island mansion, but this time she wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a beautiful dress that Ethan had bought her, preparing lunch for her son who was coming home from a business trip. The past 6 months had been a journey of discovery. Grace had moved into one of the guest rooms and slowly, carefully, they had learned how to be mother and son. There were awkward moments and difficult conversations, but there was also love, forgiveness, and joy. Ethan had insisted that Grace never work as anyone's maid again. Instead, he set up a foundation in her name to help young mothers facing impossible choices. Every child deserves love, Grace would tell the girls who came to her. Sometimes that love means keeping them close. Sometimes it means letting them go. But it's always about wanting what's best for them. Mom, Ethan called out as he walked into the kitchen, dropping his briefcase and pulling her into a hug. How was your trip? Grace asked, holding him tight. Successful, but I missed home. I missed you. They sat down to eat together. talking about normal family things, his business, her foundation work, their plans for the weekend. "Mom," Ethan said as they finished eating, "I've been thinking about my biological father." Grace looked at him carefully. "What about him?" "I think I want to find him." "May I ask why?" "Because I want him to know what he missed," Ethan said firmly. "I want him to see the amazing woman he abandoned, the successful man I became, the family we built together. I want him to understand what he threw away. And if he doesn't care, then that's his loss, because I already have everything I need right here." That evening, Grace stood in the garden, looking up at the stars. 22 years ago, she had been a scared teenager making an impossible choice. Today, she was a successful woman with her son back in her life. "Thank you," she whispered to the sky. "Thank you for bringing my baby home." "Mom?" Ethan's voice came from behind her. Grace turned to see her son walking toward her with 2 cups of tea. "I thought you might like some company," he said. "Always," Grace said, accepting the tea. They stood together in comfortable silence, mother and son, finally where they belonged. "I love you, Mom," Ethan said quietly. "I love you too, my son," Grace replied. "Always and forever." And Grace knew that every sacrifice, every tear, every lonely night had been worth it, because love always finds a way home. Sometimes it just takes a little longer than expected. The end. If you're completely destroyed right now, drop every crying emoji. This is the power of a mother's love, gorgeous family. Grace's conversation with Ethan shows us that the hardest choices are made from the deepest love, and that family bonds can survive anything. Smash that subscribe button if this story touched your soul. Hit that notification bell because we have more incredible stories about love, sacrifice, and family that will restore your faith in everything beautiful. Share this with someone who needs to remember that love never dies, that sacrifice is sometimes the highest form of love, and that family always finds a way back to each other.